Log number 26, and I'm recording this on the 19th of April on a Friday. This is my final day of the week of working. As I said in the previous log, this is the beginning of the fifth design, and it started off well. I have to say, I'm at a compositional sort of section by section where I'm working on, and numerically where I'm going to be working on next, and I'm going to be sharing that in a few minutes on screen so you guys can see. In this particular composition, the way that I sectioned it is a little bit different than the previous one, a little bit more detailed. I place the shapes, but at the same time, within the shapes, there is sort of like other shapes. It sort of gives you an idea where the details are in this design and how I imagine the sort of very rough conceptual part of the story for this one. What I'm going to be talking about in this log is, I guess, the beginning part is the measurements and how that is going, and the second part of how my mental state has been leading up to this design and well what's happening on that front. So the compositional sort of guidance is probably on screen now. If my future self edits that in, that'll be great. Um, as you can see, we have again like all types of shapes, and you might have noticed that there is like 1 and 1.5 or two twos and 3.5s. It's just sort of like half sections of the section in my mind, and I imagine I would explain that. So what I've been doing this week, I have done measurements for shape number 1, 2, and 3. But the half parts is the detail that is in it that I haven't really measured and that I haven't really gone to do. There's lots of, as you can see, there's lots of foreground elements and details, whereas the background becomes very easily and simple to understand, given that the weight of the design is on its sort of base, where the 2s and 3s and 4s are, even though the 8th shape, the triangle, which we have understood that a triangle shape is the energetic part of the composition, therefore the one that becomes our focal point. So the way that I'm going to be tackling this design, I'm going to be, I guess this week I'm going to be measuring 3, 2, and 4, finishing all that. It's going to take some time, given that as you can see, there's many shapes in it. The shapes are sort of like the key points that are quite distinct. For example, in the fourth design, there's a couple of squares. So the square on the left, the smaller one, there's something happening there that needs doing. The 4 is sort of like the biggest element that binds everything together. Then the top square that is on top of that is again another element that needs to be introduced before we move on to 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are the side walls that are in the composition, and as we can see here, there is the 7th section within those side walls, which is basically a detail that is happening on that particular corner. Not a big of a detail, but it's story-wise it's really important, but drawing-wise not a big of a deal. 8 is the main figure, and 9 is basically the background that closes everything. Not a lot of shapes, as it's very simple. So I always leave the background to be the last after I finish the figure. I guess if I were to say what I think would be the most difficult part to design in all these shapes, I would say is the 4, 2, and 3s, because is the more diverse one, which will merit a lot of blending correctly in the different objects that exist there and what's happening in there. The way that the sort of shape is halved in the middle is because it sort of spans between the two that combines 4 and 3 shapes together, and it's quite an interesting take. The way that the foreground is sort of mapped out here resembles the first 3 designs, where in those first 3 designs there were a lot of information on the foreground as such, but it was it mimics this design, but it has a very different approach to how this sort of combines these elements together. Um, as I've been trying to do, I have been trying to sort of give a big personality to each design, and this one, if I were to label it in an artistic sort of medium, it's gonna be the more musically inclined without giving too much. But I think it's an interesting idea for everyone to ponder over. What do I mean by this? We'll see how that goes, if I'm honest. Um, and besides the methodical way of me sort of having to do this slowly, probably gonna take 3 weeks on average. So I guess a rough estimate on what time will this be done? Probably the 7th of May. Uh 7th of May or 14, somewhere there. So between those weeks. I guess once I finish the designs up until 5, the other ones are pretty easy to do. And then is the values, because we're dealing with a lot of shadows in this ones, are because there's a lot of lights where we have seen in the first 3 designs. Aka not a lot of light sources, candles, and all that stuff. So moving forward in the physical part of the design, quite excited. Let's see how this goes. And at the same time, my mind wanders on the next design, the final design of the 6 sequence, which I wanted to end it with quite of an interesting twist. Now, the 6th design, as an idea and as a sort of concept, is the most simple of all 6 designs in terms of what you see in there, but the most impactful. And I was thinking of creating sort of like duality between the two. Now, what do I mean by that? So, in each design, there is the story, the actual drawing of the story, and the what do I imply by what's happening in there? Sort of, let's call it 3 sections that make the composition. Now, every time that I've been changing designs and moving forward, I've been trying to hone on these 3 very particular ways of designing the story. And every time I would sort of add a different element that between the 3 sections sort of will overpower the others. Sort of like having the balance between the 3 big questions. And you might ask, okay, that will create a bit of a disruption. And that's my point. The disruption happens when, given that there is 6 of them and you will be seeing them together, I think the balance happens between the 6 versus the one that stands out between them. So it's not balanced by itself by the individual composition, but together it creates the balance. Because if I section each composition to have an element, your exploration will be this part, your exploration will be on this sort of section and whatnot. It creates a very interesting way of going around it. Now, bear in mind, when you're going to be interacting with these 6 sort of sections, it's going to be at random. What do I mean by random? I mean by, I don't know which order you will take them, given that you will have a choice to choose between the 6, and you would sort of pop between any of the 6 that you want at any time. And you can go number 2, 4, 6, 3, 2, 1, very out of order. So I had to have to consider that you won't be seeing them in order. And it's been interesting having to think about that, to be honest. And moving forward to how that element becomes sort of key in the sixth one. So the duality that I wanted to introduce on the final one that I've been thinking as I'm working on the fifth is that every part of the compositions connect somehow and somewhat to the one before and after it. And in the sixth one is sort of like a very conclusive, okay, this is something very obvious. But the obvious, given that it's very simple to understand, with the composition that I've been working on in my head, leaves a lot of questions that are deemed to be answered. And given that the simplicity comes from the time that has been worked on it, and the time has sort of like passed through it and created whatever you're going to be experiencing. I was thinking the duality to come in a way that you will, by exploring the composition, you will find something or some part of it that will prompt you to an alternative slash original part of the design where what it used to be, which part of all the compositions that I've been doing is to show what it's being displayed in the now and imply the what it used to be through the words, and sort of some other interesting parts of the now then and what we're thinking, well, the Stonemason thinking. But in the sixth one, I was thinking of creating that duality in some form through the composition. Let's say you press this thing, if you find it, when you find it, and you have a hint of that, and you have like, wow, look at this before and look at the after. Because on the sixth part of the design, the words are very vague, given that in the story, the sixth section is sort of a mystery. So I find that quite interesting because it gives every compositional part of this sort of sequence a very personalized take. So I've been thinking about that and how that will evolve, even though I'm sort of like moving up a step. Um, I'm sort of, I usually work that way. I start something and then I ponder what's happening on the next. And then when I reach section number 4 and I see the foreground, I'm going to be really honing in on the fifth design and whatnot and really find the angle that the point that I wanted to make to come into fruition. So that concludes the part of the physical composition part of the story, and now we go to my mental state. So as I began the fifth design, I've been sort of having a bit of a difficult time on my thought process on where I am at right now and what I have been before, which is a very common thing, and I think in terms of a thing for me to do. And what I mean by that is the interaction that I had before in Flow sort of leaves echoes in my mind moving forward in the Stonemason theme. And that comes to the back and forth sort of conversations that I lack now and I gain on in another area, but the lack of socialization that came with Flow brings me to a bit of a depressive sort of outlook on how the stonemason is sort of developed. Depressive outlook, not in the sense of quality, but in the sense of this sheer isolation that I'm feeling when I'm designing these things. Bear in mind that I was sort of quote unquote my best years in this experience of me arting in my life has been sort of presented in flow. Um, as of now, I obviously think the Stonemason is sort of elevating that, but it's always a reflection, always a sort of like thinking back what happened and what can I do better, and all that. I've always been like that. The depressive outlook comes with this story at hand. I'm depicting someone who has been isolated and has been completely away from everyone and had so many things to say, but not a lot of people to be around to say that. So he sort of creates the words, creates the sentences, the paragraphs, and just leaves them around for people to find. Not in the not in the sense that I wanted someone to find them out type of thing. I don't think so, but more of it is natural for us to want that connection, to want that vocalization of how we feel in any type of way, be it by words, by drawing, by music, by anything. And I've been feeling that, and it on one part makes me really grasp the concept of the story and really be able to put my personality and at the same time the character's personality into the story and really make this alive. But the other time, the other side of this, the more dark side, is that I know that in any journey that anyone would take, be it artistic, any type of work, whatever, let's think of it as a path, as a road. And usually, when you dedicate it and you want to go and experience it, there is so many different sort of nooks and crannies and curves and twists that this road might introduce to you. And sometimes when you're on it, you don't really. It takes you to places that you didn't want to go, right? And usually, having to explain or depict them in some form, those unexpected twists that are unpleasant to you become a necessity for you to feel comforted, to feel like, you know, this wasn't what I was expecting, but at the same time, I'm not gonna give up and I'm gonna be sort of taking a note that this made me feel the type of way, and then moving forward, the next thing might be the thing that will make sense of why I didn't like this before or how did this came to be. And I've been having that a lot in this story. I've been having this sort of road being taken and me going to places that I sometimes I don't want to go or I wouldn't plan of going and I wouldn't be comfortable going, but I go there nonetheless. And when I'm there, um, my mind begins to sort of create sort of like bubbles of momentary relapse of my past and the things that I'm experiencing that are sort of triggering me and becoming a bit of emotional overload of a moment. And primarily I have been able to use this to my advantage because I narrowed down my hours of working on this automation, sort of using 6 hours rather than 12 or 8 or 9. And that allows me to take a healthy break, move on to something else, and really carry that and let it subside through another artistic format or through another story that I'm reading or through music, a documentary, whatever. Just to wind down yourself on whatever you've been on and whatever cloud or atmosphere your mind has allowed you to reach or stoop down to. And every time, ever so often between the months that I've been working on this, it happens, and it happens quite gradually, and it sort of begins to gain traction. And as it gains traction, I lose a bit of the not strength sometimes to feel like, what I'm doing is important. And I feel like I'm putting myself in situations where it really is unhealthy for me. But somehow, when I'm sort of, let's say, 90% of the time, I'm using that to drive my my storytelling and drive myself as a human and as an artist that reflects life and reflects history and is going to reflect history and the people to come and look back to this. And I say, no matter what I'm feeling, no matter what I'm going through, I no longer talk about myself anymore. I'm talking about situations that I feel like deserve a, a reiteration in the current world's perspective. What I mean by that is, when I take myself out of the equation of like, oh, I'm this person, I'm designing this, I'm spending my hours locked in a studio thinking and drawing without anyone or anything to interact with. When I take that away and I say, but at the same time, I'm depicting a big portion of, or a part of the foundational part of being a human in questioning. When you question yourself, when you question your surroundings, it's a very isolated and a very personalized time. And I think it wouldn't have worked if I was doing that in a sociable way, in having to have people around me or constantly talking as I'm creating this. Because authenticity, I think, comes from the reflection and the mirroring between the creator and the story and the protagonist of the story. And some days are easier and some days are worse. But I've been having a bit of an up and down um, sort of experience. And it's been happening since the beginning. It's been happening since the start of the story, and I would just not be able to understand it very well. And as I'm moving through sections and evolving this arc, I'm beginning to understand what I'm feeling, and what is this that sort of creates um, not a really an issue, but creates a big foundational part of both the drive to do this, but at the same time the disconnection between me living and dedicating the time to explore. And I've touched upon this on one of the logs, previous logs. I don't remember which number, so to reference if you wanted to hear that. But I was saying how it is taxing for me to create stories such as this, because it takes so much time from myself and in my life, and my ability to socially explore myself. I explore myself internally, explore myself through reflecting in a very intimate and personalized way as I'm creating this with the creativity and whatnot. But it takes so many years. And I know for a fact this would take so many years to create, in the sense of it would take at least 3 years for me to create all the arcs. And I have an idea how it's going to evolve, and I'm really excited. And I think it's going to be something that it's honestly something brand new for someone to experience, and especially in the fine arts slash artistic experiences of storytelling. And it makes me feel like it's necessary. And even the story, it's a very It's a thing that we all have read, heard, and experiencing in some shape or form, and it might bring an interesting perspective through my research and my sort of application of how I see life and how I depicted life in these words and stories and compositions that I've been creating. It's a big undertaking, much bigger than Flow, I would say. Maybe not in scale, given that Flow's paintings were huge and these ones are quite controlled, but they're varying in many different outlets and many different languages of art and words and letters. And I wouldn't be able to do it before, and I'm able to do it now. I know that I'm not quite there in terms of the exploration that I want, but I'm slowly getting there. And I have an idea of how things will be and the possibility of how to bring them there. But I'm sectioning things quite smartly so I don't get overwhelmed. It's like any other part of a realization is to focus on something. It's a lot easier to undertake rather to focus on the bigger picture, which is you will go mad in the first instance that you try to do that. So many lessons are currently being applied and revisited through this story. And I wish I could I wish I could show more of what I'm working on, and it's the first time in my life that I've been really this great in keeping a secret. In terms of, usually when I create something visually, I'm like, look at this, and I would sort of passionately explain every nook and cranny until someone goes, aha, I finally see it. But given that there's so many elements that create that aha moment, and I'm only at step number one right now, showing the step number one would sort of merit a lot of random words that you probably won't understand. So having a section being fully fledged out, created, I think it will really show the potential of this rather than just like, okay, see what you're doing, but really understand what you think of this so highly. But I think if I sort of create the experience, the first arc or a sequence of the first arc, it will really give the understanding of what's the potential of this. I tried doing the way that it will be interacted on Christmas log number 9. I remember that log because it was the week that I was supposed to submit arc number 1 in the very first beginning of me tackling this theme, which I thought it would be like, oh, it's gonna be 6 months, 3 months, first arc, 3 months the next, and maybe I will extend it. It was, we were talking about that type of thing, which didn't came to be. But I gotta say, it's been it's been a learning curve, that I no longer can ignore, and I no longer can run away from myself to have this. Because I keep saying it again and again, if flow was something that you enjoyed and something that you felt this was something special. And I know the part of that made it special was the interaction between me and sort of working as it, sort of talking and working and having you present in every step of the way. And now this part, this new story doesn't have that. But what it does have is the sort of isolating part of me doing that alone and bringing you a fully fleshed out, um, unbeknowingly new, and using your own sort of ways of exploring it without my voice. Meaning that if you were witnessing the paintings in flow before and I was painting, let's say 10% into the finalized painting that you were seeing, I would explain. So this part is going to be like that, and then the next going to be this, and sort of will tie it up together and whatnot, and you will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see it. And then in the next few days, week, months, you will see it unfold, and you'll be like, oh yeah, beautiful. I'd let that simmer through my mind. I acknowledged it, and I really applied myself in it as you were creating it. Now this time around, the depiction is already done, and you have like these sort of foundational logs that if you were interested you will go back, or you might listen to them sporadically or whatnot. But going back to that, and you having a fresh new experience without any part of me guiding you through it in terms of breaking the immersion, just you knowing how to go through it, which is going to be explained before you even interact with this story, and you being able to know what you can do and your limits, and then going in there. I think it's going to be a very interesting observation for yourself on how you would explore it, in what decisions you would make, and how much time you will give it, and what you will get from it. So it's continuation of the personalization of who you are and how you interact with a very detailed and quote unquote meaty type of stories. So yeah, it was a bit of a long log, but there was a lot of things on my mind, and things I think are there gonna be more and more as I keep going, which is great. It means that I'm reaching checkpoints and turning stones. Is that how you say it? Turning stones? That doesn't sound very right. Turning points, yes. I don't know why I said turning stones. Doesn't matter. I'm gonna include it in here to hear my blubber. But turning points are essential when dealing with anything, and especially when it comes to storytelling. And I think the more I dive into it, the more I will have them. And once I reach the point that I feel what I'm questioning now has been understood, the next corner will be taken, and what I have understood will no longer be a closed book, and we will once again open it up and add more notes and pages and things to move it forward until the day that I no longer are able to do this, aka towards the end of my life, whenever that is. So yeah, that was 33 minutes of me talking, which, if you like that type of thing, that's great. But yeah, let's see how this conversation goes. I think it's going to go as well as the previous one, and even better. I have been really honing down on how I apply myself into new composition, and really helping myself before I even started, so I have a smooth sailing. And if I face anything wrong, I know how to make it work through my many experiences before of like failing, aka first three designs where the the page got ripped apart, the face got smudged to bits, and I was able to overcome all of them with some shape or form. So yeah, um, yeah. Let's see how this week treats us, and thank you very much for listening.